It is July the 16th, 2019, 4:02. This is the Independent Ethics Board for the City of Tallahassee. We are meeting here in the City Hall Commission Chamber. That's called to order. We have a new member appointed by the Public Defender, Miss Ruby Barr. She succeeds Miss Shanor Grewal. Miss Barr has a number of years of practice that I don't believe, because I know she's not old enough to have this number of years of practice, and operates the Southside Community Law Center, and is an advocate for people who may not be quite indigent but can't afford traditional legal fees. Ms. Barr, if you would introduce yourself to us in the audience, it would be much appreciated.
Okay. Thank you. Should I stand or stay seated?
Whatever you need.
First, I want to say it's a pleasure to be here. Everyone has been so nice. I think part of the reason why I am here is twofold. One of the things is I've always heard most of the time when someone asks me to participate in any type of venture, they say that if you want something done, give it to a busy person. Mm-hmm. And that truly describes my life. But then the other thing is that my father always told all of us when we were growing up that service to others is the rent we pay for space on earth. And so I thought he was really, really smart until I found out later on he really didn't come up with that. But but I've lived probably in Tallahassee now both times, probably about a total of 20 years. I really do love this area. I'm originally from Broward County, Florida, and again, began practicing law very early on in my career. I wanted to do then what it is that I'm doing now, and so in my pre-retirement age, I'm able to do that. I must say again, though, I really do love Tallahassee. I've gotten to know quite a few people here all around the place, but as much as I love it, in my retirement age, I am looking for somewhere to live that doesn't have a traffic light, not even a blinking one.
You have to live within the city limits to continue to serve on the board.
Well, unfortunately, we do not have jurisdiction over traffic lights, or maybe fortunately, but you are most welcome new member of the board, and please, if there anything that if we're rolling on something and you're not quite sure what we're doing, stop us, and any help you need along the way in the next month or so to get your feet planted firmly in this ethics world, we are more than happy to do whatever we need to do.
Okay. Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from our June 18th meeting, from our last monthly meeting. You have an 8-page set of minutes in front of you. Does anyone have any comments, corrections, edits, deletions, additions, suggestions for improvement? A way for me to keep my apple from rolling. It's not going to.
Not on the screen.
Well, it's not. There's no flat surface. Seeing none, Mr. Smith moves adoption of the amendments, and Ms. McNeil seconds that. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The minutes are adopted. I do need to note that Mr. Ray is excused. He has issues that have prevented him from being here tonight. The next item on the agenda, we'll walk through these items sequentially in the ethics officer report. We'll stop after each one, see if anyone has any comments or questions. First item is the monthly summary. Ms. Meadows-Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This document is one that you all see each month, and Ms. Barr, you will see this from me each month. I do not have a supervisor here in City Hall, so there has to be some way for board members to know what it is that I'm up to, and usually if you call me, I will answer the phone. But these are specifically things that I did since our previous meeting. One particularly great thing, again, was orienting our new board member, Ms. Barr. We do have an onboarding process for new members, and it was a pleasure to work with Mr. Andy Thomas, who is the newest appointing authority to the board and has already had to make 3 appointments. So third time is a charm, and we know that Ms. Barr is going to make a great addition to the board. Additionally, I have been training or educating a lot of Parks and Rec staff for the last several months, and I will report that Sunday, these are done Sunday, usually around 5:00 p.m., because these are people with odd schedules. There were over 100 Parks and Rec employees receiving ethics education on a Sunday afternoon. So the city's emphasizing that education not only for folks that work here, but for anybody that is out in the community. And in fact, I explained to those folks that they are ambassadors for the city, even more than folks that may be tucked away in an office. For example, I'll embarrass Ms. Tamayo's son, Joseph, is a lifeguard, and he actually was at the training on Sunday. I may have embarrassed him a little because I remember when he was a small child. But the city's emphasizing ethics education to each and every employee. They've assigned or they've asked me, they don't assign me work, they ask me nicely to educate those folks. It's my pleasure to do that. That one was particularly well attended. The usual meetings, I've continued to meet with commissioners related to our budgetary needs. I have experienced smooth sailing with all of that. And then finally, I wanted to just put out there that the airport parking pass policy, you can say that 3 times fast. There may be a prize for you or not, because it's the ethics board. But you'll recall back in October of last year, this board did a memo to the city commission. If you weren't on the board, I'm looking around, a lot of you, some of you weren't, but this came to our attention through news media and some other complaints that these passes were being utilized for personal travel, and it's not just city officials, it was various dignitaries throughout Tallahassee that got this free parking. So the board, in a proactive manner, as it's done in the past, wrote a letter to the commission asking them to please take a look at this policy and perhaps limit that parking to official business only, related to the job they're doing. So we are now in July, and it was reported at the last commission meeting that they have effectuated that policy. It was reported in the news media, but that detail that the board actually was the incentive behind that was just not included. And I just wanted to make sure that the board got the recognition that it deserves for taking that issue on and effectuating change. Although it wasn't a violation of the city ethics code, we did exercise our influence with your leadership to get that changed. And with that, that is the conclusion of my report.
And I just want to go back to Ms. Barr on this one. Since we have already worked the public defender to death on appointments, I think that means you are stuck here for the next 6 years. So,
Okay.
So just be prepared, and none of this retirement talk. Any questions of Ms. Meadows-Keefe? Seeing none, the next item is our monthly budget. And my recollection is there was nothing on this that was not in the expected category.
No, sir, Mr. Chair. I will note that there is an expectation of a legal expenditure in the amount of $21,000, but that is for cumulative legal work that was completed by various councils, Mr. Reed, Ms. Tamayo and consultants. And so that's from February to May, that amount. So we did do a complete redraft of the city ethics code, several workshops, and developing our recommendations to the city commission. And you'll recall that Mr. Reed has offered us a very good hourly rate, very much discounted.
Right.
So I think we're getting good value from that. So that's the only thing that's unusual.
So now that we've done our recommendations to the city in terms of the ethics ordinance, we've revised our administrative policies and we've revised our bylaws. We should be pretty much done with the amount of work that we've been sending the way of our attorneys.
Unless there are complaints.
Right.
We hope not.
Okay, any comments, questions? Seeing none. The next item is the issue tracking report.
Yes, Mr. Chair. This reflects, for new member benefit, and for those of you in the audience or watching, I do track inquiries that I receive through various modalities over the month. And this month, there were two. One came actually via the hotline, and you'll see it described there on the spreadsheet that there was a television commercial that was playing, and there was an official's likeness on that commercial, and identified that individual's office. And it was just a montage type commercial where they threw a bunch of pictures together to advertise. So I did speak with that official after recognizing that potential issues included misuse of position, paid airtime, perhaps being a gift, perhaps it being considered an endorsement of one business over another. Spotting those potential issues, I went to speak with the official and learned that this was a ceremonial event where the individual appeared in official capacity, and photographs and video were taken, and that this particular footage was aired without his knowledge or consent to use the likeness, and the individual made a phone call to the business. I'm sure it was an interesting call, and the ad was pulled from the air immediately. So being very forthcoming and straightforward about it, I don't see that this individual did anything that's violative of the ethics code. The recommendation I did make to this official, and the board may want to discuss this now or later, is some guidance for officials when they appear at events like this in their capacity, but they're filmed. I mean, everyone's filming with their phone, their computer, their iPad, and you don't really know how that footage is going to end up being used. So perhaps as individuals are going to do that, particularly for businesses, that they be told, hey, if you're going to use this footage, you need to let me know, and I need to give permission. Maybe there's even something in writing, but maybe the city attorney's office, with the board's help, could help officials avoid this in the future. So I am recommending this issue get closed. Okay,
questions of Ms. Meadows-Keefe?
Well, I'm going to try to croak
Ms. Graham.
through this. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I saw the spot that you're referring to, and it just, I felt, my immediate reaction was that there's something about it that didn't feel right. Now, I'm not saying there was any ethics laws violated, but I do think that as a public official, it's inherent upon you or by your team to just talk with the individuals about any use of footage in advance. Maybe have a form that says you may not use my likeness in any sort of commercial manner. just so that you don't face having to be surprised by something like this.
And the official, ironically, had not seen the ad.
Really?
I had not seen the ad,
Oh, I guess I'm lucky.
but then others had seen the ad, so I don't know what that says about my consumption of media. Usually it's on my phone or my iPad.
Well, how about if we do this, board members? If we try to find out for next month if the city has issued any guidance to officials, and if not, that we put on our agenda the possibility of us recommending to the city that they have. I think there are two aspects to this. One is guidance to city officials in terms of who they show up for and who they support. Some caution about knowing what who your audience is and who you're going to be paired with when you show up at this event. And then the other piece of that would be whether or not when you show up for a ribbon cutting or for some ceremonial event, whether there's some standard language that could be given to the vendor, the provider, so that we're very clear that city officials are not picking winners and losers in the private market. If you're going to a opening of a new law firm, that you are not endorsing that law firm above other law firms in the city that have long been doing the same work, for instance. So with those two aspects, and we'll put that on the agenda for next time and have a full discussion, make sure that we understand what and if the city has done anything, and we can review that ahead of time. If that meets with everybody's. I'm seeing nods. Ms. Meadows-Keefe.
And Mr. Chair, I just want to kind of elaborate on Ms. Graham's comment that the call to the hotline was an anonymous call, and the person said they liked this particular official very much, but that it just didn't look right to them. So they didn't go through a big elaborate analysis, and it goes to that appearance issue that we're always trying to emphasize to people. So.
And I think it would be important to have the local officials team, chief of staff, someone have training on this as well, just so that they're thinking ahead and dealing with this before you see a TV commercial that's already been cut and put on air.
Right, and depending on the time of year, some of this could wander out of ethics world and into elections world also.
Really? You think that might happen?
I think it might happen.
Shocking. Okay.
I'm sure someone on the board knows more about that than I.
And this could also be a part of annual ethics education that the ethics officer does in January for all the leadership, so we can fold that into.
Okay, Ms. Meadows-Keefe, item 170.
Okay. I'm not sure, Mr. Chair, I didn't make a recommendation on this particular issue.
Because it involves you.
Because it involves myself.
And let me just say that Ms. Meadows-Keefe and I had a discussion about this, and we implemented an informal policy, which I would hope the board would agree with, that if a complaint comes in that involves the ethics staff, whoever they might be, whether it's the board attorney or the administrative assistant or the ethics officer, that it would go on the sheet, whether it's a hotline call or an ethics complaint, but that the staff would not deal with it, that they'll either kick it to the full board or kick it through the chair to some individual board member to follow up, so they're not investigating themselves. Ms. Meadows-Keefe.
So this individual has previously come before the board and addressed the board and has subsequently posted more inflammatory material about not just myself but another board member here. So it's actually someone who it seems like just continues to make inflammatory comments.
Why don't you just tell us what the comments were that you received?
Okay, so the comments were that they believed that I wanted to turn off cameras, and then they talked about another member who wished to turn off cameras. They indicated they thought I was weaponizing a court at one point, and that there was not transparent information on when ethics meetings occurred, and it was addressed for that last piece, in that the individual came and my assistant very readily showed this individual where one can locate our meeting times, dates, and locations. I have not had further communication with this person.
Okay, I'm going to make a recommendation that we go ahead and close this. And Ms. Barr, for your purposes, what has happened, and this is not the first time it's happened, is that someone not a member of this board said something, and then the board was accused of proposing that. So, for instance, in this case, someone has said that I believe this complaint said that the board proposed that the city commission stop airing its meetings, or that the board said that we would turn off cameras, or proposed that we would turn off cameras or microphones during board meetings if there was something that was uncomfortable to us. All of those statements are untrue. And it's easy to check. I can say that with some assurance because our meetings are televised, and anybody who's got the hours and the stamina could go and watch all of our prior meetings and see that none of those things have ever been proposed by this board or by a member of this board. The closest we have come to that is we have had discussions about if people want to talk to the board about issues that are not ethics issues. If they want to come and talk to us about the trees in Tallahassee, would we as citizens be willing to listen to them? And the answer is we would, several of us at least, would be willing to sit in a workshop session, which would be recorded but probably not televised, and listen to anybody's complaints about anything having to do with Tallahassee. But in terms of this board doing the job that it is charged by the city charter to do, that we will continue to televise all of our meetings, and we'll continue to listen to anybody who wants to come talk to us about their ethics concerns in the city.
Mr. Chair.
So, again, I'm going to propose that we close this one, and unless I see any objection, I'm seeing none, so we're going to, without objection, close that. The next item is a list of all of the public records requests that the city received in the last month. And we routinely get these. We did not originally get them. We decided to ask for them and to put them on our agenda because we thought it might be an opportunity to mine for issues that we might want to raise as ethics issues. You will see that far and away the majority of these relate to picky things. I want to know what the utility bill for a certain piece of property was. Maybe I'm thinking about buying that property. I'm not sure if the owner's being honest with me about energy efficiency or something about a particular employee. Occasionally something jumps out at us. There is usually another list. This one will typically run 6 or 8 pages. There's usually a one-page list that the city officials tease out of this longer list of the issues that they think are big. So, for instance, if the Tallahassee Democrat made a request related to something for certain city records, they would probably put that on the shorter list because they would see that as a more of a public policy, a general public policy request than just an individual wanting some very specific piece of information for their own use. This month, that second short list does not exist because there simply were not issues like that from the city's perspective. But again, each month what we encourage everybody to do is go through these and see if there are any of them that to them raise and in their minds raise an issue that looks like it's ethics related. In that case, we can follow up and get the public records request response from the city or find out more information and put it on the next agenda so that we're able to follow up on potential ethics issues that the board has identified, has teased out of this list. So if anyone saw anything on this, Ms. Meadows-Keefe.
Mr. Chair, just in the spirit of transparency and honesty, there were requests made.
What's the number?
It is starting on 2009-406. I'm not sure which page that is.
Well, but they're sequential, so
2009-407.
19.
Yeah, 406, 407, 408. 409. The Democrat, anyway, a periodical did ask for things.
Sorry.
I see one request was canceled. I know they were working on others, but interestingly, the city didn't put that on the
Okay. Well, from the city's perspective,
city's
that
perspective.
doesn't rise to a policy level for the city.
Right.
Might rise to a policy level for us.
Right.
So do you know if the information has been provided on a couple of those? Is that correct?
Yes, I believe it has, and I'm seeing a slight nod from the reporter in the audience, and yeah, I believe those were provided.
Okay, so I guess the question is that something the board wants to see, since that relates to us? Or does one member of the board want to volunteer to be a committee of one and review those responses and see if there's anything that rises to the level of something that the board needs to address? This is basically our communications back and forth with Ms. Meadows-Keefe, either as individuals or as the board. And also from some other people, I think one of them related to city officials, city elected and appointed officials. Or are we comfortable that what's been put in emails is stayed?
Please call me.
Okay. Seeing nothing there, is there anything else on here that jumps out at anybody? If anybody ever wants to come back to anything on this issue, we are happy to follow up on it. On that particular one, I think because of the requester, we are, if there is anything interesting, I am sure we will read about it. And save ourselves some work. That brings us to the ethics moment. What I'd like to do with ethics moments, at least for the rest of the year, is bring them more in the nature of ethics education. Rather than talking about things in other jurisdictions, talk about things that relate specifically to the work of this board or the work of the city. And so what we have this time is the law that relates to voting requirements. So you should know that if you are in this room when this board takes an action, you are required by state law to vote. You cannot abstain, nor can a city commissioner or the mayor abstain if they're in the room when a vote is taken. The only time, there are two exceptions to that. The first is if there's a conflict of interest under the state ethics law or under our local ethics code, and your voting would create the appearance of an ethics violation, then you are allowed to abstain from voting. And the second is that if we are acting in a quasi-judicial capacity, so if we went into a shade meeting, I know I'm not supposed to call them shade meetings, but if we had executive session out of the sunshine to react to a specific complaint against an official under the city ethics code, that while we're acting in that quasi-judicial proceeding, you are allowed to abstain from voting in order to assure a fair proceeding. So even though in this meeting on a routine matter you might vote on something that involves the son of a good friend of yours, because that wouldn't be an ethics violation. In a quasi-judicial proceeding, that might be something where you said to maintain the appearance of fairness, I'm going to abstain because the person involved happens to be the son of a good friend of mine. So a slightly different standard, but you get to make the judgment call in those quasi-judicial proceedings. There is, and Ms. Meadows-Keefe, if I could get you to hand these out.
Absolutely.
And there's a bunch of extras that can go out to the audience. There is the State Ethics Commission has a Form 8. If you did have a conflict, you would fill out this Form 8, which is available online. We're going to give you a copy right now. It's a two-page form that includes both the instructions and the blanks you would fill in that would explain your conflict and why you thought you had it and what statutes were involved. Then if you would jump in this is the law is basically about when you get to abstain. Tried to excerpt a lot of that. If you would jump to the bottom of page 7. When you have a conflict, ideally, the law says you should disclose that conflict before the meeting. Now, there won't always be an opportunity. You may get into a meeting and learn more about an issue and go, oh, I didn't realize I had a conflict on this, but clearly I do. And so there is a statute that says if you didn't make the disclosure prior to the meeting or the conflict was unknown prior to the meeting, you make the disclosure orally at the meeting and then file a written memorandum within 15 days. And so since this is a statute, 15 days means 15 calendar days, not 15 working days. So those are the rules under which we have to operate in terms of our voting or abstention. As a longtime government employee, I can tell you mostly people abstain by simply walking out of the room, which I think is a very bad policy, and I'm going to propose at some point in the future, at least for this board, that what we do is have a form that we fill out so that if, for instance, I wasn't here for a vote on something, obviously I can't be counted toward the passage or failure of that item, but afterwards I would fill out a form that said, had I been present, I would have voted yes or no, so that I am forced as a member of this board to take a position on everything that comes before the board for a vote. Now, I don't mean things like approval of the minutes. I'm talking about where we would, for instance, take an action that relates to a recommendation to the city to change the ethics ordinance or something that's truly specifically related to our jurisdictional duties. So just so you'll know that's coming, I think that is a fair thing on a body this small where presumably we could be in a situation where we have a quorum of 4 people present, 3 people vote yes. I think it's fair for the public to know how the 3 absent people would have voted had they been there, so that we continue to build a record of the kind of integrity that we hope this board has shown in the past and will always show in the future. So you can expect to see that from me at some point in the future. So that would be our ethics education. We are not subject to the 4-hour requirement that elected officials are, but we have always tried to informally count up by the end of the year to make sure that we've done at least 4 hours of clear discussion of ethics things that apply to us or that would apply to other city boards or the city commission, so that if we're going to be opining on these matters, we ought to at least get the minimal level of education that's required of the elected officials who have to live with it. That said, we would be on forms, and I think, Ms. Tamayo, this is your show.
Well,
so you remember last month we adopted our board bylaws and our procedures for handling complaints, and the bylaws and procedures each referred to a couple of forms. We did not have those forms in final form last month, and said we would come, because they're basically fill in the blank, they're not substantive, but we said we would have them at this meeting for the board to review and approve or edit. So, Ms. Tamayo, you're recognized.
Yes, and on behalf of Mr. Reed, he sends his hellos from Japan. So I'm going to start that's on the agenda, Mr. Chair and members.
Ms. Tamayo, pull the mic down a little bit. You're in my hearing, at least, you're kind of in and out.
Am I cutting in? I'm so sorry. I usually can be heard. Is the petition for advisory opinion. This, of course, follows along with our administrative procedures that were adopted, I believe, in 6/18 meeting. And it is a fairly self-explanatory petition for an advisory opinion, which comes within the jurisdiction of the board. You will see that on subsection 2, it has misuse of position and solicitation and acceptance of gifts and this form will need to then be amended once the ordinance are passed. And so the original draft had the other sections, and the chair thought it would be best to remove them and make sure that we had a clean copy. So this one is very self-explanatory, and if there are any questions in reference to that, I'd be glad to answer them. But they were drafted by Mr. Reed, and in case there are any questions that we have, they're self-explanatory on the petition for advisory opinion.
Okay, this one in particular, if the City Commission acts on our recommendations in terms of expanding the city ethics ordinance, we would have to come back and make some
Correct.
edits in both our bylaws and in this form to incorporate and cross-reference
But we
whatever they would adopt.
That is correct, Mr. Chair, but we thought we'd go ahead and approve these so that we could start using them. And then, once the other sections of the ordinances are approved, then we would amend the form, and they would be added, ladies and gentlemen of the board. They would be under subsection 2, where we would add the additional ordinances and citations to the ordinances.
Mr. Smith.
All right, I have a question about section 2, the respondent section. Would that be appropriate for an advisory opinion as opposed to just a complaint form? And what if it's an action of, I guess, a city employee who wants to know how their conduct, would there even be a respondent in that particular case?
Are you asking if
Do
it
we
is
need-
appropriate to have the respondent there, or?
The section.
Yes, section 2, it says, "Person against whom the complaint is made." And so the petitioner requests advisory on the following issue. It does say respondent against who the complaint is made. I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
Yeah, I guess I'm asking, what if there is no respondent? What if I want to ask the board before I have a course of conduct?
Right, and you can. I think it's able to do that. In accordance with our procedures, you can ask based on the forms for an advisory opinion, unless I am incorrect there.
So Mr. Smith, you're saying
Yeah.
really for an advisory opinion, I as an individual, there aren't two parties.
Right.
I as an individual just want to come in and ask for an advisory opinion. So this whole idea of petitioner and respondent sort of may be overkill.
Well, I'm saying the section for a respondent or naming a respondent,
Right.
person against whom complaint is made. There is an advisory opinion, isn't a complaint. So
Right.
Right.
why is that being asked?
So if we struck
Yes.
one point and all the petitioner, if we struck 2,
Yes, sir.
just that one line,
Right.
does that fix this form?
Yes.
Yes, I would
Okay.
think so.
You can remove the
Mr. Chair?
respondent. Yes.
Ms. Graham?
Could I suggest that we have two forms for petition
Okay.
for advisory opinion? One, if the individual wished to file a complaint against a respondent, and one if they just wanted an advisory opinion
Yeah.
on an ethics issue.
Yeah, that might be on that second form, that sworn complaint form.
Yeah, the
But-
sworn complaint is different.
I'm so sorry, I brought
Yeah,
the,
our bylaws, or our policy says you can ask for an advisory opinion, but it has to be about your behavior, the implications of your behavior. I can't ask for an advisory opinion about something you are doing. I can only ask for an advisory opinion about something that applies to me.
okay,
or after.
I'm sorry, can you explain it more to me?
So to request an advisory opinion, if I'm a commissioner and I'm considering a particular business relationship that I haven't yet entered into, I would frame that issue and ask this board for an advisory opinion if that would be okay or not. And the Commission on Ethics regularly does these. I can't later on, after I've already entered into the business relationship, then ask for an advisory opinion to bless that. You're supposed to do that before. And then additionally, if I see my political opponent doing something that I feel is a violation, I am not permitted to ask for an advisory opinion on that individual's behalf.
Right, that's
Okay,
what-
I understand, but so in terms of an advisory opinion, I could see a scenario where it would not involve a respondent. It would just be a question you might have about an ethical issue,
Correct.
right?
Like an
Correct.
ethics question. You're just talking like an ethics.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
so, I mean, that was whether we could break this into two different forms.
Yeah,
Or whether our bylaws prevent it.
Well, we certainly can talk about that. I know from the State Commission perspective, one of the things they were worried about was having people ask sort of generic questions. They might lack the fact-specific nature that would allow the State Commission to provide an answer. It's kind of like going to a judge and asking for advisory opinions. They're not so big at answering advisory opinions. They like case and
Factually
controversy.
distinct.
So let's do this. Let's take that issue and put it on next month's agenda.
Okay.
So for this month,
Yes, sir.
we're going to strike line 2.
We're going to start line 2. The whole section or just line 2?
No, I think just
Just
that
line
one
2?
line.
And then
Okay,
I had
thank you.
then on the back page, I had a question about petitioner submits the following questions of law. And that's, are we answering ethics code issues, or are we now providing legal advice? Because to me, that could come off as, if you're asking a question of law, that means that you're asking this board to provide legal advice in a particular situation. And since this is on the advisory opinion, you're asking the ethics board to provide legal advice prior to your action, and that's not what we do as the ethics board.
I would agree. I think we could take that sentence out too. And then 3 obviously would be on
Okay.
second page 3.
You want
would
to take
be
that out,
renumbered
Mr.
as
Chair?
2.
We'll do that. These are just in draft, so be glad to do that.
So when they ask us for an advisory opinion, Mr. Smith, they're going to say, I might do this behavior, and maybe I don't even know if it violates the city ethics code, and it falls on us then
Correct.
to parse the code, whatever it may look like at that point in time, and give them advice. This behavior, it looks like to us, would not be solicitation of gifts or not relate to gifts, but it might be under misuse of position for this reason under these circumstances. We would provide the law.
Well, we would
Correct.
provide
Such
the
as-
reference to the ethics
Right,
code. We're
right.
Yes.
not
The
getting
reference
into-
to the code, right.
We're not getting into.
Yes.
I believe,
I like those changes very
Yes.
much.
I believe that there may be, and I will check, in advisory opinions issued by the Florida Commission on Ethics, there may be some disclaimer-ish language
Okay.
that they're not necessarily binding, and if you go back and change one thing, like we said you could do
Yeah.
this, and then you do it slightly different, you can't then go back and say, I'm okay. So I'm going to check on that disclaimer language, because I think that's included in most advisory opinions.
And when you request an opinion from, let's say, the Commission on Ethics, they do go through their, the
Legal
law,
lawyer.
and so I think Mr. Reed's attempt to do that was to answer the question of law in accordance with our ordinance,
Right.
with our code.
Right.
So that's not unusual because they compare very factual situations to what's already in the law, and for them, it's Chapter 112. For us, it would be the Ethics Code. So if we can, if you'd like, we could change the petitioner submits the following questions of the code or the ethics code. Would that be, Mr. Chair or the commission, would that be better, or do you want that struck?
And one of the reasons is I don't want, one day there may be an entire board of non-lawyers. And I don't want it to be that now they're practicing law by giving legal opinions or answering legal questions. So I want to.
Yeah, the board would not be giving the legal opinion. The board would be following counsel's role
Recommendation.
based on the recommendations and the facts, so the board members would not be practicing law in that regard.
And then hopefully the petitioner asking for the opinion is getting independent legal counsel from their own lawyer. So their lawyer suggested, hey, go get an advisory opinion, and then they go through that, and then they make a strategic decision about whether to proceed or not. So hopefully that petitioner has his or her own lawyer to advise them on what they ought to do.
Well, but I can see, too, if we get the kind of changes that we proposed in the city ethics ordinance, where it would apply more broadly to many more people, that there would be a lot of people who wouldn't want or need a lawyer. They would just say, this thing's been happening in our office, and I feel a little strange about it, and so I think I'm going to ask just to make sure that, somebody brings in cookies some vendor brings in cookies, and is that cool? And they shouldn't need a lawyer in that case, and we should be able to give them just a straight answer as it relates to gifts.
We could have an FAQ page, too. If we get a lot of those types of questions, we could have a frequently asked questions page.
But it's going to be so fact specific.
So as I understand it, Mr. Chair and members, we're going to strike number 2 under respondent, and then we're also going to strike the petitioner submits the following questions of law. Is that what the board's pleasure is?
Yes, and then renumber 3 as 2 on the second page.
I'm sorry? And renumber number 3. Yes,
Options for redaction would become 2.
yes, sir. I got it from here.
Mr. Smith, does that meet with your,
Yeah,
does that address
yeah.
your concerns? Perfect. Anybody else have anything? Is everybody okay with these changes?
Yes, I want to fully support everything Mr. Smith said.
Okay.
All right.
What I'd like to do is go through all 4 of them, and we'll just vote on them as
Yes.
a group. And again, on this one, we're going to come back with an alternative based on Ms. Graham's concern.
All right, and next, Mr. Chair, I'll take in order, that was in reference to our Administrative Procedures 102. The next is the sworn complaint form, which is the form that would be provided to an individual, obviously filing a complaint for investigation in accordance with our code. This follows, in fact, the procedures as already laid out in our administrative procedures. And in the back, it does give, which is important, an explanation as to the background and obviously certain parameters regarding the confidentiality of the complaint and submission of the sworn complaint. I will note for the chair, for the board, under confidentiality of the complaint, I think we need to add, it says, and I'll read for the record, a copy of the sworn complaint form, however, will be sent via certified mail to the respondent person against whom the complaint is filed within 20 days of receipt and determined of legal sufficiency by the ethics, by the Tallahassee ethics officer. I contacted Mr. Reed. I saw that, and I thought it was needed because it was not clear as to when that 20, who would receive it and under what circumstance.
Okay.
So that is in accordance with our Administrative Procedures 1.03D1. So that would be an addition. So other than that, I think the form is very self-explanatory, and if there are questions, again.
The question I would have here is at the bottom of page 2.
Yes, sir.
Under penalties of perjury, I declare I've read the following complaint form and that the facts stated in it are true. Would it be possible to add, to the best of my knowledge and belief are true? Again, we've been through a lot about a big discussion about whether the person needs to have personal knowledge. And we've said, no, we don't think in order to file a sworn complaint that you have to have personal knowledge, but you have to have gotten some information from some source, and you believe it's true. I'm a little worried when we say, and that the facts stated in it are true. I think that's more than we've talked about in the past. I think we've talked about that based on your knowledge and belief, they're true. So a slightly lower standard there. Because I think here we're walking a fine line. On the one hand, we don't want people to make things up. But on the other hand, we do want to encourage people who believe that there are ethics violations occurring, regardless of why they genuinely believe that, to report those to us.
The only thing I would say there, Mr. Chair, if that is in conflict, because we specifically cite the statute, which is verification under 92.525. So if the language conflicts with that, we will have to remove that section of the form.
I'm looking at the statute right now. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, and I didn't have it in front of me.
I'm looking at the statute right now. There is an exception to allow language to be added for verification on information or belief,
Okay.
if permitted by law. And so the question in my mind is that in our case, the law is the ordinance.
Correct.
So we just need to look and make sure that that is in line with what we have
Right.
in the ordinance. And we could then add the language, to the best of my knowledge and belief, may be added.
To the best of my knowledge and belief?
Yes.
Okay, that would address my concern 100%.
So we can say to the best of my knowledge and belief.
See, it's so good to have so many lawyers
Yes,
up here.
I agree.
It's a great thing.
With handheld devices.
With handheld
God.
devices that you can Google anything you need to know about. One question I had, and I'm assuming that this meets the legal requirements of a sworn statement based on statute, but is this this is in the place of having a notary a need for a notary.
Yes,
And this is something that is commonly used.
Yeah.
I normally get things notarized, but this is,
no, let's say, I'll say this, that on complaints where you are dealing with regulatory agencies and you're
Oh,
filing a
okay.
complaint,
okay.
we have seen that language, and I think that language was taken, if I remember correctly, from discussions previously. When you file a complaint, let's say you would file a complaint against some licensee, that would be that requirement, unless there's a specific requirement to notarize
Okay.
that complaint.
All right.
Yeah.
And
Yes,
less
ma'am.
burdensome
Oh,
on
I
the complainant.
agree.
So
Yes.
But I am a notary public, and I have the stamp and everything.
you want to use it?
I don't think I'll be available well, maybe I will never be available for this need because everyone's going to behave themselves and we're not going to have any ethical issues. So, but anyway, so I think that the statute allows it as long as it's permitted by our ordinances.
Yeah, I
It
think
is.
all the ordinances, it has to be
And
sworn.
but it has
doesn't
to,
go
we have to
beyond
get the city commission to approve the ordinances. So that's something we're waiting on as well.
But remember, this is now dealing with the current jurisdiction of the board, so we do have that.
We have the
Yes, ma'am.
sworn complaint, we just never have done it. Well, I'm happy to see all of this work being done. I think this is very good.
Okay,
Thank
so,
Okay?
So-
So if I remember correctly, just for the record, we are going to change under the verification. It will now read, under penalty of perjury, I declare that I have read the foregoing complaint and that the facts are, to the best of my knowledge and belief,
Yeah. the
are true.
language- The language
Best of my
specific
knowledge and
is,
belief.
to the best of my knowledge and belief, may be added. Yep. Following that language.
Are true? I'm sorry. I'll look at the statute,
Yep.
make sure it's there.
I think you
I
could put
can
it in
Google
after
it
the
to you.
word that, and that, to the best of my knowledge and belief, the facts stated in it are true.
Yep.
Best of my knowledge.
Just in terms of
belief are
placement.
true. All right, got it. I'll
Okay,
refer
so
back to the minutes and
everybody
correct.
okay with that one? I know, I'm just on that particular
No, I-
change. And Ms. Meadows-Keefe?
Okay, there's something at the top of this form. I just want to bring the board's attention so that you guys
You're on
can.
page 1?
Yeah,
Yes.
page 1, the sworn complaint form. There's a note at the top that says, if you wish to remain anonymous, you should call the hotline. A person that decides to call the hotline should know, I think, that the board is only going to prosecute sworn complaints. So I would not want someone to see this and say, oh, I don't want to fill all this out. And I don't really want to give my name, so I'm just going to call this number. And they're under the impression that this is something that the board can act on because the rule requires a sworn complaint. So I just think there ought to be like another sentence there
Okay.
that says, this is for the board to decide, but just so people aren't given wrong information that they call and they think it's going through a process that it's really not.
So how about if we added a sentence along the lines, the board may decide to self-initiate a complaint on the issue. The board may decide to self-initiate a sworn complaint on the issue. Or because a sworn complaint is required, the board may decide to self-initiate a sworn complaint on the issue.
And you could cite to our ordinance.
That's a lot of words. But,
So-
That's a lot of words.
but it puts people on notice that they're throwing it in our lap, but it doesn't mean that we will necessarily treat it as an ethics complaint. We would have to make an independent decision.
But may I ask a question? Would it be best to just say, or you may either file an anonymous complaint or file this complaint? Would that suffice? So that's with some clarity, Mr. Chair or the board members?
Do we even need to have this sentence in here?
Yeah.
I would
We
say-
already in our procedures state really specifically
take it
how we
out.
can,
Strike
how we
the whole
can
thing?
initiate
Yeah.
the complaint, or how we self-initiate complaints.
Let-
Anyway, this is separate and distinct. So
Yeah,
go
I'd
ahead.
say,
Take it.
I would move to strike it.
Yes,
I
Mr.
think
Chair.
Ms.
I hear a motion.
For the
Ms.
same
Page.
reason we modified the previous reform to make it clear, I think just striking that first line would make it,
Great, that's a better
You
solution.
want so it's the pleasure of the board to strike the first sentence altogether on the form?
Yes.
Is that correct, Mr. Chair?
You've got it.
I got it. I'll take it out and make sure Mr. read no's.
I am seeing nods up and down the row here.
Nods, we need to nod, so I see that nods, all nods are, yes, I see. Okay, all right, let's do that. Then we have the notice.
Sustained.
Ms. Meadows-Keefe will correct me if I'm wrong. Then we have the notice and election of rights form, and that is obvious. I've read it. It's very self-explanatory. Obviously, option 1 deals if someone disputes the allegations. Of course, as follow-alongs with our procedures, does allow for an abeyance for 15 days for settlement purposes. Option 2 is, I do not dispute the allegations of material fact, and I wish to submit an oral written evidence in mitigation in accordance with our rules. And then 3 is, I do not dispute the allegations. And it clearly states this is a legally binding document, and so that everyone understands that they need to seek legal advice before, obviously, filling this out. And this is very similar to what is used for other administrative agencies throughout the state. I think it's very self-explanatory and follows along with our rules under 1.04.
Okay. So this is their 3 options.
The 3 options,
Pick one
yes,
of the
sir.
3.
So a respondent will receive this?
Yes.
If they receive the complaint,
Yes,
a copy of the complaint.
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Comments, questions?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Just a typo. On option 3,
Yes, ma'am.
where it says, at the second sentence, I request that a final, just an L.
Oh, there's an L missing. I just noticed it. Thank you.
Okay, so we're adding an L.
We're ending an L. The sentence is the last sentence. Thank you, Ms.
Yeah.
Barr.
We're adding a
I
final L
request
to
that
the
a
word
final
final.
order imposing a penalty and fines be entered in this case. I'll note that change.
Okay, good
Okay.
catch.
And then the last one, I believe.
Okay, wait a minute.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Any other comments or questions on this form? Seeing none, Ms. Tamayo.
Thank you. And the next one is the disclosure of ex parte communications as discussed when a member of the board is approached by individuals regarding any type of ex parte communication. And this is the form that will be used and dated by the members of the board. This is for board members.
Okay.
And again, as we talked about when we were doing our bylaws, this is ex parte communications when we are on a matter that is in which we're in a quasi-judicial mode.
Right.
So if somebody says, hey, I see that you've got ethics education related to topic X, and can I talk to you about that? That's not an ex parte communication.
No.
It's just talking about the normal business, the routine processing of stuff that we do.
That's not an ex parte.
But if we're in a quasi-judicial mode and somebody comes up and says, hey, I hear you have a complaint about so-and-so, have I got some stuff to tell you, you simply shut it down.
Yes, sir. That is correct.
Yes. Do we need to add on here, Ms. Meadows-Keefe just handed me a note, do we need to add, well, this is for us.
Yes, sir. That's
So-
for the board members. Yes, sir.
So do we need to put who we should file this with?
I would say the ethics officer would be the logical person to do that, unless the board sees fit to have someone else, but
We can add on the bottom, I think, to be filed with the ethics officer.
Right.
Would that be a
Yes.
pleasure of the board?
And what about adding the chair as well?
Yeah, probably, or, well, it would be, well, I'm assuming people will do this electronically. I think, yeah, I like the idea of sending it to the chair and the ethics officer. Because there will be those instances where the ethics officer is on vacation or something, and having 2 people is always a good thing to do, and this is the kind of thing where we want to, this is to protect us. We don't want anybody to get bit without seeing it come.
Mr. Chair, if you're sitting in a quasi-judicial, that would be a communication directly to someone else on the board. So I would suggest that it only go, I'm just bringing that up, I would suggest that it only go to the ethics officer in case there is that issue, because then you are communicating directly, and I would not put the chair in that response. Just a thought.
that's right.
I'm sorry. Right. I would, or designee that is not sitting in that quasi, or you could say board council.
Well,
Or board,
what if we
board
say?
council, because board council doesn't sit in the quasi-judicial. Board council is an advisor to the board, so it can go to the ethics officer or board council. But I would not put a member of the board on the form.
Mr. Smith?
Yeah, I
pleasure.
could, yeah, I would, yeah, the council would be good. 'Cause I would
If I'm just suggesting, because that way it stays within the realm and authority of the board.
Okay, board members okay with that? So if you filled one of these out, you would be giving it to the ethics officer and, or, is it an and or an or, the board council?
I would say to the ethics officer, and if not available, the board council.
Let's just do and.
And?
Make it both.
Ethics,
So
okay.
you're gonna send it to those two people. You got their email addresses. And then they can talk and work things out. And if for any reason, either one of them, it gets caught in spam or they're on vacation or whatever, it's not going to get lost because it went to two different places.
And I suggest, yes, that board council would be appropriate, because obviously board council would be involved in those proceedings, and that way there's not a direct communication between council members.
And if there was an issue, the board council would represent the
Correct.
board member in anything
Correct.
related to this quasi.
Yes, sir. That's
Or
why.
to this ex parte communication. So that's somebody you want on your side anyway.
Yes, sir, that would be the role of, to determine if there is an issue, and of course, if there is a conflict or something of that nature, it would go to board, it would necessarily have to go to board council. Yes, sir.
Okay, so a note on the bottom that this goes to those two people. So it's
Yeah.
going to fall on us to send it, to fill this out and send it to those two people. I think you would fill it out very, very briefly, you know, not necessarily a lot of detail, because it may be some of it you may, if you weren't able to shut down the conversation, the person followed you down the hall, that might be something you want to have as a verbal discussion with the board council rather
That's because
than a lot of paper.
you never know when someone may want to talk to a member of the board in certain circumstances, and then you realize, oh my gosh, I received this information, let me disclose it. I think in an abundance of caution, that's what this form
Now,
is meant to prevent.
Let me ask a question that came up after after our meeting last month. Let's say that I have a conversation with somebody, just an innocent conversation, I think it's innocent, and the next day, and it's about something going on in the city, and the next day I find out that an ethics complaint has been filed about that. So had I known about the ethics complaint, I would have known we were in quasi-judicial mode, and I would not have had that conversation. Would I fill this out for a conversation that happened before the ethics complaint was filed?
I would, in an abundance of caution, Mr. Chair, I would do that if it relates to your role then in hearing the ethics complaint. Yes, sir.
Okay, so everybody's cool, everybody's copacetic on that one.
Yes.
You might not even know when you're having the conversation, this form could come after the fact.
I think that's important, because that just leads to the credibility and transparency, and any appearance that anyone in the complaint process from the respondent or the complainant side may raise that there is a conflict or a bias or anything of that nature. I think it's best, not that, and I'm just saying I would advise that if that happens, an abundance of caution is to fill out the form anyway.
Okay. Any other comments or questions?
Mr. Chair, are we going to be voting on these?
Yes, ma'am, I was
Will
going to do
be
it
our
as-
official forms?
Yes.
How are we going to let the public know about the availability of these forms?
Well, they're in our bylaws, and
I mean, I know we have a reporter for the Democrat. I'm sure that's going to be his lead.
they'll also be posted. They'll be on our website.
Okay.
Press
But,
release.
yeah, but I do think it's important that we inform the public of the forms, because if they haven't been available in the past, and they now are in line with our ordinances. So just curious how we're going to accomplish that communication.
I can do a press release
Okay.
for publication.
Okay.
And then I have folks that I send those to that will hopefully publish them.
Yeah, I know
so-
one of those folks. Yep.
One of, maybe,
I know multiple, actually.
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, and this is something that goes back to our conversation about social media and developing social media. You know, this is something that we can be proactive to get information, where we're doing something in service to the city of Tallahassee to further their ability to have input on ethical issues. So,
That's next month, we'll have that presentation.
2 thumbs up,
Okay, double like?
double
Okay.
like.
And Ms. Barr, I
Maybe
saw,
even a love, maybe even that far.
Don't get that carried
No,
away.
no.
Ms. Barr, I saw you leaning toward the mic. Did you have a comment, or were you just, okay?
Mr. Chair, if we find any, if I would request just by virtue that if we find any other typos or any technical issues, that we have the authority to make those changes
Okay,
on
so-
behalf of the board.
So let's do this. Ms. Graham moves the adoption of the amendments, of the
the new
4
forms.
forms
Yes.
as amended
As amended.
tonight, and I think each one of them had either 1 or 2 amendments. Right?
Thank you.
Who wants to second?
And Mr. Payne's going to second it.
Yeah.
I saw him leaning up.
Yes.
And we're going to append to that if staff find any typos, a comma that should be a semicolon, or
Nothing that
a space that should be a tab, or anything that does not change, make any substantive change,
Yes.
they make those corrections. That's the motion. So all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay. Okay, so we've adopted these forms. And we will get something out to the world that I think probably both mentions the forms and the bylaws and
Yes.
administrative procedures that we adopted last month. So we've now got a complete package. We've redone all of our back office stuff that 2 of us at least were around for, was it 4 years ago?
3.
Well, yeah, 3 of us were around.
I can't tell you
and
how happy this all makes me. I'm real happy, even though I don't feel well.
And Mr. Chair, I just want to let you know that Mr. Reed is rereading and making sure the bylaws are all correct, so they should be ready to go once he gets back from Japan for
Yeah.
loading and using. Yes, sir.
We have been proofing and reproofing the stuff from last month. And
Right, and there were edits, so you don't have edited bylaws in front of you, so he just wanted an opportunity to go back and reread and make sure that he had captured everything, all the changes.
as late as this weekend, we were finding, a place where a
Yes, sir.
paragraph was not tabbed in, and so we're trying to make them really look like Sonny Phillips was still here. She was one of our prior board members who was probably the world's most thorough editor.
Well, I did see a couple spelling errors but it didn't really matter because they were just in the reports on the calls that Julie received. So, but if you want to fix those, Julie,
I'll be.
I know you.
Those.
But-
Okay, so have we finished now with item
Forms.
6? I think we are done. So,
Thank you all for your input.
Could someone Mr. Chair, an update on where we are with the city addressing our suggestions?
Ms. Meadows-Keefe.
Yes.
And
Not even
I was
planned.
reading your mind because a little while ago I wrote a note to the chair. In full transparency, I have an update on commission consideration of our ordinance.
Yes.
As you know, the commission is now on their summer break, or if you didn't know, I'm telling you now. They had their last meeting on Wednesday. They also had a workshop, and I asked the city attorney about timetables for consideration of the ordinance. You'll recall, I think last month I said maybe September, at the latest December. The issue now is that the commission is wanting to workshop everything, or not everything, I won't say everything. Significant issues they are wishing to workshop in order to get public comment on issues of great importance. The workshops for this calendar year, according to the city manager, are full. The commission determines which issues will be workshopped. The workshops typically occur from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock, and they usually have 2 things that they try to workshop. So I can't read tea leaves, but what I can do is say that the workshop spots are full as they exist today. This is a significant issue that the commission will wish to workshop. So I would be guessing if I said exactly when, because they will inevitably wish to workshop it. So I don't believe it's going to be September, October, maybe by the end of the year, or it might be early next year. I would hope not, but I'm just conveying the information that I was given. They may wish to hold a special workshop for consideration of this issue, and I want to say they did that back when we got the misuse of position, because it was held in the morning. Typically, workshops occur at 1 o'clock before a commission meeting. So perhaps an idea would be that they have a special workshop for this important topic.
Right. To me, the important thing is that we have done our job. It is our job under the charter to make recommendations. And we have done our part. And we certainly, I think, all would like to see our recommendations go somewhere, but that's not, the ball is not in our court, let's just say. So I think as long as we keep doing our job, that's the standard we have to hold ourselves to.
I agree, Mr. Chair. I also strongly believe that the path that we have been on is get us to the place where we have the ability to do what this board was established to do. And a large component of that is the revisions of the ethics ordinance, which has to be voted on by the city commission. So we're now being held, we're doing our job, and I'm really proud of all the work that this board has done in a relatively short period of time. So I would suggest to any city commissioner that's listening that a special workshop would be in order for this very important issue that the city of Tallahassee cares about. We as a board we sit to address issues of concern regarding ethics and integrity in our city government. And we need to have those ordinances in place in order to do the work that we sit here every month and have been asked to do.
Right.
Mr. Chair, I completely respect your position. I hope that the City Commission will respect that we have done our job, and I hope that they will see the urgency to have a special session and do their job as well.
And I can tell you, I know Ms. McNeil and I, having been here from the beginning, it is beyond frustrating to have the job, have the title of the board, and have a jurisdiction that is so narrow that it is unlikely that anything of substance will ever come before the board directly through the jurisdiction. I think we've done some other things, made some recommendations that had value where we looked at ethics issues broadly, but the jurisdictional issue is one that certainly, if I were sitting on the outside, I'd go, so what does the board do? And some of that is because our jurisdiction is so tremendously narrow.
Well, I think a special session where the citizens of our city are able to come forward and discuss what we have recommended would be a healthy exercise for the City Commission to undertake as expeditiously as possible. To those that are listening.
To those that are listening. That moves us to the next item on the agenda, which is professional staff. This is basically about the ethics officer. Before we get to A and B, Ms. Meadows-Keefe, do you want to do this?
Sure. I just want to let everyone know that...
Does everyone have this?
Did everyone receive an envelope?
Because I had an envelope laying in front of my chair when I got here.
Yes.
So I just...
Was this in it?
Yes, I just now got to read it. So.
Oh, you did? Okay.
So you want to give us the nickel tour, please?
Yeah, the nickel tour is that, as we've discussed, the board is growing and changing and shifting, hopefully in a new and positive direction, moving on the recommendations that the board has made. I also know that in March of 2020, it will be the 5-year anniversary of the board's first meeting. And that's an important and auspicious occasion, that 5-year mark. So my goal for this board is that you have a new ethics officer to observe that occasion. So my intention is to continue to serve this board, and that my last board meeting as the ethics officer would be in February of 2020, and that the 5-year anniversary of the board, there'll be a new individual in this seat, and then we will have effectuated, other than Ms. McNeil and Mr. Herring, who swears on a stack of Bibles that he will not be chair in 2020. You will have a new chair, you will have a new ethics director, and we have already gotten a new board counsel with Mr. Reed and Ms. Tamayo. I would hope with that extended timetable, 6 months, that this affords the board the time it needs to find a suitable replacement and decide how they want to do that, how they want to structure the job. But I think it's important, and one goal that I have had is to see that over the finish line, that expansion of jurisdiction that we have dealt with continually since I started. I am the recipient of a lot of criticism that complaints get closed because there's no jurisdiction, and people feel like, well, gee, I just close things. But we all know that's not accurate. So a professional goal of mine for this job was to achieve this. I hope to do that, and that you will have a fresh new start for the 5-year anniversary. And there's very constructive things that this board can do in the next several months in the way of strategic planning, goal setting, things that do not depend on the City Commission necessarily acting on our recommendations. But I will say I have established collegial communication with all of the elected officials. I do believe that I'm able to communicate with them about the urgency of this. So I'd like to finish that work and then consider other opportunities. So it has been a great honor to do this job, and it'll be my continued goal to continue to serve well throughout until February. And that will be my last meeting. And hopefully, if you are able to select someone prior to that, there can be a slight overlap, so there can be a very smooth transition. But something I realized is that there's this thing called institutional knowledge. And I feel like Ms. McNeil, Mr. Herring, and myself are the institutional knowledge. I don't wish to end up in an institution, so I want to make sure that I've written down everything because that has value. I did do a scholarly article on the beginning of the board. I left off, and a lot of stuff happened immediately after that was published. So I hope to actually write the follow-up to that and make sure that the knowledge is available not only to the next ethics director, but to the director after that and the director after that. So this board can continue to grow and evolve. So I did want to let you all know that, and I appreciate your trust and confidence. And the main driver for this, I will say this is completely and entirely a decision that I have made. I have talked with my family. I've prayed about it, and I just feel that it's the right thing for me to do, and it's also the right thing for the board to be able to hopefully be new and invigorated with the enhanced authority. So that's my, did you say nickel tour? Or is it a dime?
Questions, Ms. Meadows?
Thank you, Julie.
Okay, the next item then on the agenda is the rewrite of the ethics officer job description. And this is my rewrite, so, please feel free to have at it. But there were a couple of things that I was trying to do with this. We had not looked at this since the first few meetings of the board when we adopted it. And at that point, we had the job description when the ethics officer had worked for the city. And there was residual language in this document from the ethics officer as a city employee that I thought was inappropriate. So it makes it very clear that all the direction comes from the board. It, in a number of places, removes reference to city officials. Certainly the ethics officer would have communication with city officials, city employees, but I didn't think they belonged in the job description. And it removed some language that was inappropriate under the charter about the ethics officer making some decisions that are clearly board decisions and not ethics officer decisions, for instance, issuing penalties for ethics violations, which might have been something the ethics officer would have done as a city employee, but certainly not as a board employee. I attempted not to change anything terribly substantive. Most of it you'll see is minor word changes here and there, striking unnecessary language. I will say that it picks up language that I think we talked about in the bylaws, that the ethics officer reports to the board. The board hires, fires, promotes, demotes, evaluates the ethics officer. But for all other purposes, the ethics officer is a city employee, meaning they cut the paycheck, they do the withholding and figure the Social Security, and all of the city policies, the HR policies that relate to city employees, would also relate to our ethics officer. So they would be held to at least the same standard that all city employees are for all the things that city employees are supposed to do or not do in terms of serving the people of the city.
Why did you line out
Where at the end?
the end of, about the filing of the Form 1?
The Form 1, you'll see the last sentence is struck. That's state
Yeah.
law. And it didn't seem to me that we needed to restate state law, particularly for a one-time event in the ethics officer job description. That's something that anybody who is a Form 1 filer, when they leave the position, all of us as board members will have to file a final Form 1 when we quit being on the board. I didn't think that because, again, it's a requirement of state law, it seemed redundant to do anything other than point out that the financial disclosure requirements of Chapter 112 do apply to the ethics officer. So I would welcome any edits. And if anybody in the audience has anything that they think needs to be, no. Seeing none? Seeing none? Sorry, I had silenced that.
A nice ringtone.
Mm-hmm.
It's the default ringtone. I don't know where it's.
I like it.
It's the
Just
phone.
saying.
It's the phone.
Very
company.
pleasant.
I did not pick it.
Mr. Chair, I know you like more formal, and I'm sorry that I violate. It's
No.
completely on me, but it was a nice ring.
So any edits, comments? Would anyone like to move the adoption of it?
Go, Renee, go.
I move it as presented.
Okay. Ms. McNeil moves. Mr. Payne seconds. I see him nodding. Now I'll take that as a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. So we have adopted those changes. Now, in my view, when we advertise for a new ethics officer, what we do is we put a one-line ad in the various places that you do and say, the Ethics Board is accepting applications, see the job description. We don't need to write anything else about the ethics officer. And then, in my view, we would get applications in, review those applications in a public meeting, narrow them down to some number of people, and then invite those people in to talk to us again. If the only way we can do it as a collegial body is in a public meeting. So hopefully we get it down to a relatively small number of people, and we could rock and roll on that when people are ready to go.
It doesn't have to be a board meeting, correct, Mr. Chair? It could be
It could be a workshop.
I think that would be a better.
It would be a recorded public
Yeah,
meeting.
yeah.
We'd have it as all of our meetings. We have had, and
Stanley, you okay?
we've had video or audio recordings and minutes of all of our meetings, whether they were in this room or not.
Mr. Chair?
Ms. Meadows-Keefe.
Right, I would just add for the board's consideration, Mr. Chair has a really good, efficient proposal, probably very cost-effective as well. Advertising can be expensive, but I would state that, like, when the city is doing an advertisement for an appointed official, when they advertised for this job, there was a fairly detailed ad in the Democrat, in the Florida Bar News, and again, it didn't have the whole job description. It was fairly descriptive, and then it referenced a website for people to go and apply. So maybe what I would suggest
Well, Ms. Meadows-Keefe,
is to
how about
have a
if
look at those
you get us
before.
that document, and
Got it.
we'll put it on our agenda for next month, and
Perfect.
we can take a look and see. Obviously, we want to put enough out there for people to know what the job is, but as I recall, when the city advertised for this job, they got
150 applicants.
150 applicants, so I do not think that we are going to be short of applicants. Now, applicants and qualified applicants, of course, are two different, in our minds, are two different things. We will have some paperwork ahead of us. I know how much you all enjoy, particularly Mr. Smith enjoys piles of paper.
Yeah, 2 of them.
Ms. Tamayo.
I had a question. Under minimum training and experience, the 10-year mark, the 10 years is stricken, which leaves substantial to be what? And so my question is, is it the board's call to remove a certain number of years' experience, given that, is that a minimum, or was there, normally
I
you see
did-
a certain number of years of experience for even very high-level positions, and so,
I did that intentionally. I think that the board, in selecting board counsel, we just this last time, we basically got applications and let the board members review. It has always seemed to me awkward when there's somebody who falls 6 months short of the minimum experience level or minimum number of years, and so and that's the person you really want to hire. So if we found somebody who,
just ask.
I trust the board to pick the person and to screen. If somebody comes in and says, I don't know anything, I can't spell ethics, but I'm really good, I think we'll screen them out very quickly. Although,
Just a question. Thank you, Mr.
I
Chair.
agree. I tend to agree with that.
Okay.
and particularly for a job like this, I'm not sure what we're going to be looking for. Clearly, it doesn't have to be a lawyer. If somebody came in and they had a great investigative background, I would think that might be somebody that we would want to consider seriously, because a lot of this job is investigative in nature. And if we get expanded jurisdiction and we start seeing some complaints, then it'll be even more investigative. And we're pretty lawyered up here at the table.
Hey,
My question wasn't for lawyers, mine was just the period
Right.
of total experience in whatever field
Right.
or related field. It didn't have anything to do, Mr. Chair, with being a lawyer. I just,
Right.
just curious.
I pondered that at length, and I couldn't
I'm sure you did.
find a number that I didn't know why we needed to tell the board what, in that sense, what to look for. Well, it's one of those I think we will collectively know it when we see it.
Just a question.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is the ethics officer evaluation. And so what you have in front of you is the 2 evaluation forms, the long one, the 9-page one that we used in 2017, and the 2-page, I think there was an attempt at one point to get it to 1 page, but the 2-page one that we used in 2018. And while we certainly could edit these or do something very different, I thought that as the evaluation's coming up here in the next month or two, that we ought to make an affirmative decision, pick one of these to use. The process, since we can't meet outside the sunshine, is that you will fill out the form, you will send it in a sealed envelope, and at the beginning of the meeting, what we've done the past couple of years is those envelopes get handed to me, and I try desperately during the meeting to compile the results, because I can't do it outside the meeting because I'm violating public meetings, and then tell you what I think I have compiled correctly, what I hope I have compiled correctly, and then we adopt the final evaluation. So from my perspective, or if somebody else wants to volunteer to compile the 7 documents, that would be great. But,
And we've also allowed folks to bring the envelopes to the meeting. So they don't have to make a special trip here to do it. They can just bring the envelope to the meeting.
so because it's done by somebody sitting at this table during a meeting, from my perspective, shorter is better because it makes it a more doable process. The longer one, obviously, is much more granular. In my view, there were some items in the long one which is based on a city performance evaluation. There's some things in the long form that don't apply to our ethics officer. But whatever the board wants to do, we can do either one of these, or if somebody wants to say, I'll write a brand new one and it'll be short and sweet and easy, and I'll bring it at the next meeting, that's great too.
Mr. Chair, I just have a question on the format. The questions seem to be grouped into categories, but the category header has a column for the scoring. According to the list that there are 24 items below, are the category headers to be scored as separate items?
Oh, no, that's just those line, the box needs to be removed. The idea was that you would score the individual things.
The components.
Right, although we could just as easily say you only score the category headings, which on the short form would give you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 items. And the things listed below are things for you to consider when you score those 6 items. So we could make the short form even shorter. I mean, we could go either direction here, up to how much writing you want to do. Probably the more important thing, and where we don't get a lot, is those 2 bottom boxes.
Yeah, we have to.
Those are the things that where there's the opportunity to really do some meat.
Mr. Chair, I would suggest that we stay with giving a numerical right from a 1 to 5 for each of the individual categories underneath. I just think that gives us an opportunity to provide more input. And I would encourage folks on the board to, I know it's not easy to do, but for the ethics officer's sake, provide additional information as you see warranted in those last 2 boxes, because that's helpful for the individual that you're trying to help positively or potentially, with areas that need to be dealt with in a different way.
Yeah, those bottom boxes. In past years, particularly, there have been some times when what the board was doing was changing and the activities were changing, and it was a great place to say we want more emphasis placed on these new things we've started doing.
And it's not easy to do. I mean, in evaluating someone that and you personally have a friendship with, a relationship with, it's not an easy thing to do, but it's helpful for the employee to put forth the effort to do so.
Okay.
And especially if you get someone new, that person's going to definitely need
Right.
that
When is this, Mr. Chair? When are we doing this?
August.
The next
We have to finish it before October. So we could do, I think in the past year, years, I think 1 year we did it in October, one we did it in September. We could do it in August, or I would say August or September.
We've never done it in October, because then
It was
we wouldn't have met the deadline.
It was on our, it was.
Could I request September?
Okay, sure.
Just because August is going to be a busy month for me.
Sure.
I would just
September
appreciate-
works well, and
Is
so
that
what I
okay?
will do is,
just if the rest of the board doesn't have a strong, I would just prefer September. Do you,
September,
Mr. Vice Chair?
doing the
Is
evaluation.
that okay?
Right.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
So I'm hearing the shorter form, and we would not score the header,
I
the
think
headings, we would score the
individual
individual
boxes.
items.
Gives you more information as the person being evaluated.
Does that work for everyone? So you're going to
Is that okay?
give whatever 24 numeric scores, and then we'll add them up and average them in total, and then accumulate all the people's comments at the end?
Do you want bigger boxes for
Yeah,
the
I'll-
writing
I'll-
too? Because if people are encouraged to make constructive comments, those boxes are awful small. So
Yeah, maybe.
don't feel constrained by the boxes. We can expand that if you want.
I have this as an Excel document, so I can make those changes real quickly.
Okay.
So to be clear, in September, we will bring in the completed form.
We would, at the next meeting in August, we would remind you about this. We'd probably give you, we'll give you a clean copy of the job description and the performance evaluation, so that you'll have the month, and then you can either, before the September meeting, you can either mail it in, or bring it to the meeting. We can't, as board members, we can't see each other's work products until we get in the meeting, and then during the meeting, somebody will accumulate all of it and give us, averages and such, and then we'll make a decision. And it may be that if 6 people give a 4 and one person gives a 2, and that person sees the 2 and say, oh, well, I didn't think about it that way, I want to move mine to a 4 or whatever. I mean, we'll have the opportunity to tweak along the way, and then we'll come. So you're not, in my view, not bound by what you submit. We'll discuss what the cumulative results look like, and then make a decision as a board. It isn't necessarily just the average of the pieces of paper, but what the board really thinks is the best representation of the performance.
And Mr. Chair,
Ms. Meadowskeef?
for the newer board members, the reason it's timed when it is, with October being the deadline, the city is starting a new fiscal year, October 1, and in order to get a pay increase, you have to have a satisfactory job performance or above to qualify for that. So that's why they basically tell everyone, get your evaluations done in August or September.
And that's
So I've done that for Ms. Adkins.
That's an independent decision we will have to make after we do the
Right.
evaluation. We will say, what do we want to recommend in terms of pay? And what we've done the last several years is say, if the city gave an across-the-board pay increase, we want to do that with it. Without even knowing what it is, we want to do that same thing. Or we could say, we don't want to do one, or we want to do something more than that. That will be up to the board as an independent decision once we complete the numeric performance evaluation. So, with just that, I do speak in full sentences on some days. Ms. Graham moves the short form with the formatting changes we've talked about. Mr. Payne seconds that. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. So we will be using the short form. You will see it. We will hand you a clean copy next month, and you will bring it back in September. That puts us at our, and Ms. Graham, you got anything else on while we're on this topic?
No, I think I'm
Okay.
thankful for the, for Ms. Meadowskeef's letter. I think it lays it out very well, and I'm looking forward to the board moving forward and having established all the work we've done in the last however many months I've been on this board. Haven't I been here for most of my life?
It seems like it's dog years, right?
So that I think we're going to be in an excellent place with the new ordinances in place. And I really want to stress that I really hope that the City Commission will expeditiously set a special workshop date. It's really important. And I hope the city of Tallahassee and those who live in this city recognize the significance and importance of that as well.
Okay. This is where we would take our break. I would tell you that I think we have less than 15 minutes left on our agenda. Do you want to take the break and come back, or do you want
the whole agenda?
Yes, ma'am.
Finish
Really?
before the break.
Or do you want to just roll through it, or do you want to go ahead and take the break now and come
I
back?
tell you, I really, really need to use the restroom.
Okay, let's do this.
On broadcast television.
That's one.
If
that's
we
one
want
of
to
the-
broadcast, let's
Transparency,
broadcast
Glenn.
everything. But I could just get up and, we don't have to stop. I'll just go and come right on back. Bye.
It is.
Bye.
It is 5:43. Let's come back at 6:05. That'll give us all a
Okay.
chance to stretch. I know my legs would be happy to straighten out.
Yeah, mine went.
Oh, in my life, there's no such thing.
Yeah, I could use
I think you're supposed to pound something. She sees us. Okay.
She's waving at us. Mr. Smith will catch up. We are back 3 minutes before we said we'd come back. That has never happened before and will never happen again, I promise. Mr. Sims, I had a card. Were you going to, and I apologize, I didn't get it till just when we took the break. So I got to you late, and I apologize for that, sir.
My name is Stanley Sims. I'm at 1320 Avondale Way. Ms. Barr, again, I want to thank you for committing to serve the citizens of Tallahassee. And the reason why I'm saying that, because you're not used to me, but I've been in training. Ms. McNeil, she always looks at me and smiles and says, but he has a good heart. And Gwen and her husband have got me in training. They allow me to be a part of this committee. And I guess I really wanted to come up and speak today because as I sit here, I'm very proud of this committee who has stepped up and really to serve the needs of Tallahassee. And even Mr. Hearing has really given me such great latitude and afforded me the opportunity of what this board handles and what this board does not handle. And this board has chartered us through some real strong waters. And so I'm learning now to be a little bit more politically correct. And so I'm searching for good words right now. But I'm asking this board why we were sitting here, my phone has just been going off in reference to the leadership of this board and the direction that this board is going. And citizens are watching, Gwen, and they are concerned about the leadership of this board and the direction that it's going. And I'm just asking that this board, before it make any decisions about how we're going to replace and the time factor and the time frame, that you would give citizens time to contact you. They're texting me, and someone's told them that I probably got some pull here, but I don't. But they are concerned. And I want to remind this board, this is ethics. Ethics. You're the referee. You should be consistent. If an individual has not upheld to that standard of ethics, then it should be dealt with in the same manner as you make recommendations to any person that you find findings. Mr. Hearing, one time when I was in ACI, I know y'all used to acronyms, but that's Appalachia Correctional Institution.
I've been there, Mr. Sims.
There was a chaplain there, Miss McNeil. His name was David Pippin. and he was a real nice guy. He rode a motorcycle. And he taught me, he said, Stanley, it's not that riding the motorcycle is wrong, it's what you do when you're on the motorcycle. Does it put the institution to shame? He said, is it illegal for me to go and do a donut right here on the campus? No, it's not illegal. But would it put my position to shame? Would it cast the institution into a negative light? So we as baptized believers, we as Christians, must never do anything to put Christ to shame. Because when we do that, we lose respect. And this board, if you notice from your outlook now, we don't have as many claims coming as we used to have, because you have done a very good job in educating the citizens of Tallahassee of your purpose. And so I think that we need to be consistent. I think that the citizens needs to be heard before this board makes a decision in reference of how we go with our new ethics independent officer. Thank you, Mr. Herring, for allowing me to talk. And I tried to do that within 3 minutes.
Mr. Sims, your internal clock is working down to the second.
Look at Mr. Smith. Don't you?
I don't have to look at Mr. Smith. I know how he's going to react to 3 minutes. The next issue on our agenda is whistleblower. Ms. Graham, you had asked if we could get the city to respond to us on the whistleblower, and the answer is for this meeting, no. Hopefully for a future meeting, we will try again. We did not have anyone who could come and talk to us. I will tell you, I heard at least one comment that, what were we doing looking at the whistleblower laws, because that doesn't seem to be ethics. And I would simply point out that Florida's Whistleblowers Act is found in sections 112.3187 and .3189 Florida statutes, which is contained within Part 3 of Chapter 112 Florida statutes, and Part 3 is titled Code of Ethics for Public Officers and Employees. So apparently the Florida legislature has determined that whistleblowers is ethics. So I think we're in pretty firm ground when we want to talk about whistleblowers, regardless of what we choose to do.
Right, Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you know this. I know I shared it with Ms. Meadows O'Keefe. Is it Keefe or O'Keefe?
Meadows Keefe.
Keefe, I'm sorry. I just like to call you Julie, but I'm trying to be more formal for the chairman. But that when I was the ethics officer for the Tallahassee Leon County School District, we had whistleblower as part of the responsibilities, dealing with whistleblowers, and I think it is often from the inside of the organization, that protection that's provided to a whistleblower encourages him or her to come forward.
Right.
So there's a reason why it's within the ethics of the legislative code, the statutory code.
Right. So again, we will try to get something scheduled for next month. For Ms. Barr, our discussion from prior months, we got an education from our board counsel on how the Florida Whistleblower Act works, which basically says if you complain about something going on at work, you can't be retaliated.
Right, exactly. Right.
And the board had 3 options in front of it. One was, we've been educated, that's fine, we'll move on. A second was to say to the city, if you ever do a whistleblower ordinance, since the city does not have a whistleblower ordinance, if you ever do one, we would like to be included as an entity that can accept whistleblower complaints. So if you make an ethics-related complaint to us, we could offer whistleblower protection. And the third option was for us to ask for that to be included, but also to suggest to the city that they ought to have a whistleblower ordinance, which the law creates some very basic whistleblower rules for municipalities, and then suggests that the municipalities can do more and flesh them out by ordinance. So That's kind of where we are on the whistleblower issue, and we'll be back to it next month.
Okay, I appreciate that. I think Julie has something. you
Just
wanna
real
add?
fast, and I wanted to clarify the entity that's responsible for motivating and moving forward any whistleblower action. The city attorney's office indicated that's a management issue, so it would be someone from the management side that would come and talk about it. So,
Well, when the city sets up this special workshop, which I'm sure they're going to do, we can then, I think, integrate a conversation about whistleblower as well. I think that would be could be part of the conversation.
Great.
And to all my friends on the city commission, I appreciate you very much and all of your hard work.
You should look at the camera when you say that.
To all my friends, where is the camera?
There you go.
On the city commission. I appreciate your hard work.
The next issue, Ms. Meadows-Keefe, investigators.
oh, yeah, investigators, the board chair was kind enough to give me, a pretty exhaustive list of things to be covered, and I misinterpreted that as covered today, but over the next few months, he had several things. Investigators was one of them, but we want to revisit that and think about the need to have kind of a stable of investigators. I hate to use animal analogies, but we attempted before to do a request for information for investigators. We got, I think, 0 responses, because basically what you're saying is we just want you to hang out and wait, and we may call you or we may not. Here, I think the intention is to actually reach out and contact investigators, and I think there are retired Ethics Commission investigators that may be looking for retirement-type work that would be willing to be engaged. I know one FBI agent who's retired. So basically have a pre-qualified pool, sort of like we did with Mr. Carrington and Mr. Claypool in terms of advocates. So if we have to prosecute an ethics matter, we have 2 lawyers that we can choose from. For investigators, we really do need to have that, because when you're trying to address something, then is not the time to be trying to get investigators. So I would ask that if any of you know of anyone, and I can address, I guess, this to the audience too, please provide me with those people's names and contact number, and I'll be reaching out to those folks, and then we can, as a board, you all can take a look and decide who you may like to have, and then we'll informally have a group of folks that would be willing to help us right away if we needed it.
I think we could do this when we advertise for a new ethics officer. We could, along with that, also advertise, say that we are trying to pre-approve a couple of investigators that we might use for an ethics investigation, and kind of go through that at the same time, so that we're kind of getting the word out that we're looking for people generally, and kind of double team that one. I understand the State Ethics Commission, I think those retired folks aren't retired yet, according to Mr. Claypool, but they are retiring this fall. He suggested to us there might be a couple people there that we, would have ready-made skills for a board like ours.
We may try to want to do it a little earlier, just get a few people now. Of course, we don't have the expanded authority yet to really need the investigators, but we may want to get at least 1 or 2 that we can have in the meantime.
Right. So we will be moving forward on that, so expect to see that on future agendas.
Is that something within retired law enforcement that they would have investigators?
Yes, ma'am, absolutely.
Okay, I'll talk.
And there could conceive, depending on what kinds of expansions to our authority would occur, we might need investigators with different types of skills. So you might have somebody who's good at financial investigations would not be the same person that you want out chasing people down, doing that. I don't mean chasing people like a law enforcement thing,
Surveillance.
but tracking people down to question them, type the computer investigation versus the personal interview investigation. We might find different people with different skills, but we'd like to have a couple people pre-approved so we can move when we need to move quickly.
I had at first asked risk management. That had been one of our earlier ideas because the city uses investigators when there's workers' comp or lawsuits. And I found out those investigators are the ones that try to find you dancing on a Friday night when you say you can't work anymore. So they are those kinds of investigators which don't really fit what we need.
So anyway, we'll be pursuing that, but because when we do get a big, serious ethics complaint, we don't have time to do procurement to find an investigator and a prosecutor and all those kinds of folks. We need to have them lined up and ready to go, even though they're not on contract. We don't want to pay them on a monthly basis to wait, but we would like to have some people who've said, been pre-approved to work for us if they're available. Next item on the agenda.
Can I just say something? 'Cause
Please.
I think we don't want to give the impression that, we're sitting here hoping. Far from it. I mean, it would be wonderful if all this work that we're doing is never utilized, is never needed. Everybody just do what's right, and we won't need to use investigators or the complaint forms that we've just approved. So I just want to add that because, I mean, as we push forward, I hope that all this work just ends up being unnecessary, but it must be in place so that we don't continue to have any issues that the citizens of Tallahassee rightfully have concerns about.
Right. Be nice if we're the school zone sign and everybody slows down and nobody gets a ticket.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, I agree. Item 11 is off-campus meetings. This came up in some testimony. I believe Dr. Hollifield raised the issue, and so I put together just a couple pages here. This is primarily out of the Attorney General's Government in the Sunshine Manual. I'd like to walk you through just a couple things. And a couple of these things apply to us as a board, so this sort of fits within ethics training too. On the top of page 1, for a meeting to be public under the law, the public must be given advance notice and provided with a reasonable opportunity to attend, which went to Dr. Hollifield's questions about out-of-state meetings. Now, that's for a meeting, not a workshop. There's this case, the Ray case, or Alachua County case. If the only advantage to a board meeting out of town is that it is eliminating travel time and expense because they're already, all the board members are there attending a conference, that does not weigh the interests of the public in having a reasonable opportunity to attend. So clearly the law and the courts are very specific about this ability of the public to attend, and there is a balancing interest that the courts will apply, but that balance weighs heavily in favor of the public. On page 2 of this, we have talked a little bit, and our bylaws do allow any of us to participate telephonically or electronically in one of our meetings. There is some language in the Sunshine Manual on local boards, which would be us, and workshops and participation electronically. If one of us participates electronically, it can't count toward a quorum, but we can do it. So the law is pretty clear. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. On page 3, public comment. This was another of Dr. Hollifield's concerns that he raised. Members of the public have to be given a reasonable opportunity to be heard at the time that a board or commission makes a decision or within a reasonable period prior to that, not necessarily at the meeting where they make a decision, but if you had, say, a meeting one week and another meeting the next week, you could take public testimony in the first meeting and make your decision in the second meeting. So that's something for us to be aware of as we hear about issues related to meetings. And then starting with that bottom 2 lines on page 3, this applies to us. The public's opportunity to be heard does not apply to, and skip to 4 on page 4, a meeting during which the board or commission is acting in a quasi-judicial capacity. So again, if we're in an executive session considering an ethics complaint, we're not going to be taking public testimony, and there's no right of people to attend those meetings, and we've had several of those already. Also, the next paragraph, the statute does not prohibit a board or commission from maintaining orderly conduct or proper decorum in a public meeting. In addition, the opportunity to be heard is subject to rules or policies adopted by the board or commission, and those rules or policies are limited to, and number one in the middle of the page, rules or policies that provide guidelines regarding the amount of time an individual has to address the board or commission. So when we adopted our bylaws and we said we allowed the chair to limit somebody to 3 minutes on an issue that is not ethics related or that the board has already made a decision on or that has already been fully presented to the board, we are clearly within the scope of the law. And then the next full paragraph under the second 4 on page 4, if a board or commission adopts such rules or policies and thereafter complies with them, is deemed to be acting in compliance with the statutes, and it does not violate the Speaker's First Amendment rights. So this stuff has all been litigated. At the top of page 5, this again was a Dr. Hollifield issue. The term open to the public is used in the Sunshine Law, means open to all persons who choose to attend. So there is clearly you cannot exclude, like for instance, when we do Ms. Meadows-Keefe's evaluation, we cannot ask her to step out of the room. If she chooses to, she may, but we cannot ask her to, because even though she works for the board, she is still, under the Florida Constitution, Florida law, entitled to attend our board meetings because they are public, and so she can stay through those. So you can't, in a bidders conference, you can't ask bidders to leave as other bidders present in a public meeting. So that's a brief run through of some of the issues related to out-of-town meetings and open meetings issues that came from testimony we heard that I thought probably would benefit from having a little bit more of the legal background on those issues specifically, as I suspect we may hear more about out-of-town meetings. And there are some specific laws that relate to school districts and to municipalities in particular.
They do these trips annually. I mean, the trip that came to our attention is one that's repeated usually each year.
Yeah.
So it'll continue to come up, so that's why this was helpful.
So we've already talked about a couple of items that will be on next month's agenda. Does anybody else have anything they want on next month's agenda? And again, and for Ms. Barr's edification on this, our bylaws say if there's anything that you decide you want on next month's agenda at any time, you call Ms. Meadows-Keefe, and if it's something that we can legally put on, we will put it on, and we will get to it. And if you give her more than 24 hours notice, we'll even be prepared and have done the background work that you need done. So the agenda is not my agenda, it is your agenda. So feel free to add anything that comes up. If somebody raises an issue with you and you think that's something I would like the board to discuss, you don't have to wait for a meeting. You can just call up Ms. Meadows-Keefe, and it's your agenda. You own it. That said, any public comment on non-agenda items? Seeing none, our next meeting is Tuesday, August 20th, 2019, here in the City Hall Chamber Commission, beginning at 4 and ending at 7. And I thank everyone for their patience. We're adjourned.